Good morning. Thank you for all coming today. So today I'm going to be talking about the power of small changes. I picked a picture of a road, even though it doesn't have anything to do with making small changes, because I recognize that every person is on a journey in life. Everyone's on a certain path. And everyone's destination is the same. That's one of the things I love about our faith, our teaching. You know, most faiths will teach that if you want to make it to heaven, if you want to be close to God, then you have to believe what they believe. And you have to do the things that they say you have to do. But God is bigger than just a single religion or just a single tradition. And one way or another, God is going to find a way to lift all his children into oneness with him. Even if they're in hell, or even if they were the most terrible person, or even if they don't believe in God, they were an atheist, it may take a long time. I'm not saying that that's like the quick and easy path, but eventually God is going to find a way to reach those people. And I love that, because it makes a lot of sense to me that the God of love is not going to just leave a bunch of people behind because they didn't fit certain criteria. But it doesn't mean that our path is always easy, our path is always simple, our path is painless, or our path isn't going this way or that way, or sometimes we don't do a U-turn and drive away from God as far as we can and as fast as we can. That's the reality of life. We take many turns and detours. Sometimes we feel like maybe we're not even going in the right direction. There was actually last week somebody was telling me that she was telling me how grateful she was to be able to come to church because she felt like, you know, she was just going in a different direction, and becoming the church just helps a little bit, like correct that course. And I thought, you know, that was really beautiful. Sometimes we need big changes in our life. Sometimes we just find ourselves going the wrong way, or we going in a way that we don't feel good about, and we need a big intervention. I am no stranger to those kind of situations. As you know, I've shared many times different situations that I've been in where I felt like I needed that kind of transformative moment or that big change in my direction in my life to get me where I wanted to be. I didn't know how to get there. I told you that, you know, in my early 20s, I dropped what I was doing and I moved in with the Blessed Teens Academy, and I was with them for 8 years. And that was a big change. And a lot of the big changes that I've experienced in my life have been due to certain experiences that I can't really take credit for. Like, I went to the Millionaire Mind Intensive, and I had a mindset shift about, you know, money. And I think that, you know, we often find ourselves having the benefit of certain experiences in our life that just help us to shift our direction or our attention. You know, maybe an experience of finding God. And many of you have probably had some kind of an experience like this in your life that maybe you are remembering as I'm talking about it. Some moment in your life that really shifted the direction of your life for the rest of your life. And I think I don't want to downplay those experiences, but I want to talk a little bit about the small changes today. Because I think that sometimes we can almost get like hooked on or too focused on having these transformative experiences. And it's not just in your faith. It can be in all different areas of our life. I think a really common one is health, right? A lot of times people, including myself, we're looking for some kind of transformative health experience, like losing 50 pounds in a month or something like that. And like, you know, we see these people on the commercials. If you've been watching the Olympics, right, there's these amazing athletes, right? These are just like the top of the top. They're the most fit people in the world. And then, there's the commercials and, things we see on maybe social media about people, making determinations, changing their life, getting fit and all these things. And we want that for ourselves. We want the KonMari amazingly organized home, right? Or we want something in our life, some big shift or some big change. And we see some people have it, we want that. We want that transformative experience. But, and then also in our church too, I think that we're a little bit, we have a little bit of this culture too, where we're so used to doing big events, big activities. It's almost like if it doesn't bring thousands of people, what was the point? It's it's like if it's not a world level experience, then does it even have any value? So I feel like sometimes we can get kind of caught up in this, and it's like I said, it's really good that when we can have those transformative experiences, those big moments in our life, but it's also really important to remember the small things. It's important to remember the day-to-day activities, the day-to-day habits, the day-to-day efforts, the small things. They may seem small on the grand scheme of things, but I want to talk about how important they are, the power that they actually have to bring long-lasting change in our life. Because just like how we may have big moments in our life and we may have smaller everyday moments in our life, history is also like that. God's providence in history is also like that. When we study the principle, we see how there's big events, right? There's big critical events in God's providence, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, Noah, Jesus, these central figures that made certain steps of progress in history. But then there's all the space in between these events. And sometimes it's really easy to look at that big thing that happened, but it's easy to forget that those big things come on the foundation of small things. This is an excerpt from the Divine Principle. The flow of human history in which good and evil are gradually separated may be compared to muddy water. When muddy water is flowing slowly, the mud sinks to the bottom while the clear water rises to the top, until eventually the mud and water are completely separated. Human history is similar. With the passage of time, the evil sovereignty slowly sinks to destruction, while the good sovereignty gradually ascends on the path of prosperity. After these two sovereignties intersect near the end of history, the good sovereignty will remain as God's eternal kingdom, while the evil sovereignty will perish in eternal darkness. And then also, as God has given spirit and truth to fallen people according to the merit of the age in the province of restoration, their heart, which yearns for the freedom of the original mind, has gradually been revived. In step with this progress, their heart toward God has also been restored, strengthening their zeal to live according to his will. So this kind of theme comes up a lot in the principle. As I was researching this point, this kind of concept of like a gradual change or like a slow change comes up a lot, actually. And we can see that, in biblical history, it would be nice if God could just be like, oh, okay, let's do this, and not have to wait 400 years here, 210 years here. It'd be nice if God didn't have to wait between Jesus and today to be able to bring the second coming, right? But God had to work through a period of time and through people who are willing to give of themselves, of their lives to God in whatever way they could. When we study the life of Jesus, we know almost nothing about his actual life. Jesus, we know that we know the story of his birth. We know that when he was 12, I think, he went to the temple and his parents were looking for him, and he was talking with the scholars there. And then we pretty much don't know anything about the rest of his life until he turned 30 and he started his public ministry. This is what we know. We know that he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them, his parents. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. That's pretty much it. From the age of 12 to 30, that's what we know of Jesus' life. So you would think, yeah, Jesus was probably preparing. He was probably studying. He was praying. He was growing. It says he grew in wisdom and stature. But we don't really know much. That this one of the most important people in all of history, his entire adolescent life can be summed up in a sentence. So, but I think that was probably a very important time in his life. That probably set the stage and was the foundation for his 3 years of public ministry. That was the foundation upon which he could go out and he could teach and he could forgive and he could love and he could change history. So we don't know what he was doing during that time. It was probably many, many big things, but it wasn't big enough to be mentioned in the Bible. So similarly, we have to consider our own lives. We may have moments where we have the opportunity to do something big in which something that history may remember. I don't know if I'm ever going to do anything that history will remember. But I do have, I have big moments in my life from my perspective. But I think it's really important for us to recognize that although we have big, maybe life-changing moments and experiences, don't forget the little day-to-day activities. Don't forget the day-to-day investments, the ways in which we work in our everyday life to heal relationships, to invest into our loved ones and our family members, to work on ourselves, to pray, to make conditions to God. All these things, they set the foundation. For one thing, it helps to solidify the transformative experiences that we have had. It helps to make them permanent. How many times have you met someone or known somebody who had an epiphany moment, or like a transformational moment, or like an earth-changing, I recognize this about myself, or I understood something for the first time ever, or I decided to make a big change. But then 6 months later, a year later, 10 years later, it's almost as if that thing never happened. So is it more important to have had the transformation, or is it more important to make it permanent? I mean, obviously both are important. I shouldn't try to combat one versus the other. But I think that as a society and as a culture, we look for these big moments, monumental moments, the moment that God speaks to me in a crash of lightning or something like that. Or the moment that, my family has this big breakthrough and it changes everything and we love each other again. These experiences can and do happen. But it's also important to set the groundwork for them to continue, for them to be permanent. I feel like learning to successfully navigate life is kind of like learning to drive. It's another reason why I use the picture of the road. Try to think back. It might be a long time ago. Try to think back to when you were learning to drive. One of the first things that, if you have a good teacher, that they'll teach you is that, when you're first driving, your temptation is to look right in front of you, to try to make sure you're staying in the lines. Try to make sure you're not hitting somebody or running into the car in front of you. Your focus is all right there. But then, eventually you learn that you have to look further ahead. You have to look at the horizon. You have to look kind of at the destination, sort of, short-term destination. If you focus in on the destination, then automatically you stay more in the lines without even having to try to stay in the lines. Obviously, you need practice. Another thing is that as you focus in on the environment around you and not just right in front of you, then you see obstacles coming. You see drivers that aren't paying attention. You see animals coming. You're to some degree able to anticipate obstacles that are going to come into your life before they're right there in front of you and you have to swerve to try to avoid them. I have a friend in high school. A rabbit jumped out in front of his car and he swerved around to try to avoid it. He rolled his car, almost died. And if we don't anticipate, or if we're not looking in the distance, then all we see is what's right in front of us. It doesn't give us time to anticipate. It doesn't give us time to react in a maybe more like wholesome way. Sometimes we can't avoid it, but as much as possible, as we are trying to figure out our life, we need to try to figure out where I'm going. If we don't have a direction of where we're going, then all we're seeing is what's right in front of us. When we're looking into the distance, then it's the small changes become natural. We don't even really notice them anymore. The small little corrections we have to try to make to stay in the road. So, as we go through life and we experience many, many different things, these small things can actually become, how do I say this? It's kind of like when let's say you're saving up for something, and something very expensive, and you are pinching every penny. And after a while, those pennies add up into a lot of money. Over maybe of the course of a lifetime, it can be tens, hundreds, thousands of dollars. Similarly, like small things are like that for our life. Many times, a difficult direction in our life can start off just by a small thing, a small anger, a small resentment, a small hurt, a small judgment, a small self-righteous attitude. Left unchecked over the course of a lifetime can end up being a very heavy burden on our shoulders. Similarly, when we make the good efforts, if small things in our day, to make the effort to pray, to make the effort to come to church, to make the effort to forgive, to make the effort to read. They may not seem that big of a deal. It may not seem like this monumental, providential thing, but over the course of your life, I think you would be surprised by what of us, even if it's a small alteration of your trajectory of your life, what that can look like down the road, 10, 20, 50 years, your kids. We recognize that some of the burdens that I'm carrying, that we are all carrying in our lives, these are things that many of them are generational. Many of them are things that we inherited from our parents, who inherited them from their parents. From that perspective, then how you live your life and the small things that you do in your life that lead up to big things is not really insignificant. You can ask your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren someday how meaningful it is to them that you made that effort. You don't know what that's going to mean for your life. Those small efforts may be the difference between saving or losing your marriage 30 years down the road. It may be the difference between being in the place in your life where you can make a difference in someone's life, where you can save someone's life someday. It may be the difference between you being in a situation where you have a hard decision to make and you're able to make the decision and not run away from it. We focus so much on the decision or the experience, but we forget that the little things that we do in our life prepare us to be able to make that decision. prepare us to be able to have that experience. Many years ago, I was on STF, which they call GPA now, and I was fundraising every day because that's what you do. Let's see here. I think I don't have to explain this to anybody today. And there came a point near the maybe 2/3 of the way through my year where I was having a really hard time. You fundraise every day. You go out and you go to store, house to house, and you knock on the door and you're like, hey, would you like to support our fundraiser? And most people, in my experience, will say no. Some people will say no harshly, and some people will say no with a smile, but they don't mean it. And some people will be very nice. I never did well fundraising. If I could I was talking, Serge was here from Ukraine last week, for those of you who know him, and he was out fundraising to try to raise money for his college tuition. He was like, and my goal every day was $500. And I was like, man, I never made $500. If I made $150 in 12 hours, that was a pretty good day for me. So naturally, at some point, I got a little dry and I got a little discouraged, and I was having a really I was going out and I was going through the motions, but I wasn't feeling it. And I had these expectation that, if I was going to be doing this every day, I was going to have a certain kind of experience. I was going to have experience with God. I was going to have some miracles were going to happen or something like that. But it wasn't happening. And so my captain at the time took me to some place to talk. He's like, oh, what's going on, And I was telling him, like, I'm just having a really hard time. I'm going out every day, but I don't feel like, I'm growing. I don't feel like I'm, having the kind of experience I hope to have. And, we talked about it, and he was like, so what are you thinking about? And basically came to the conclusion that, I had expectations that weren't being met. I wanted to have a certain kind of experience and I wasn't having it, so I was getting discouraged. Part of that experience, of course, was making money. I don't know how they do things these days, but back then, everybody was ranked by how much money you made. So the further down you were, the more depressing it was. And for me, it was a little bit of a value statement. It's like people at the top probably feeling really good, but the rest of us, not too great. So, but I eventually came to the realization that I was struggling so much because I was being selfish. I had my own expectations of what I wanted my experience to be. I wanted to be making a certain amount of money, and those expectations weren't being met. So I was, God wasn't even in the picture. Supposed to be there, growing my faith and deepening my relationship with God, and I'd forgotten about God. It was all about fundraising. So so that was a big wake-up call for me, and a lot of tears. You can imagine after, maybe you can imagine, maybe you can't, but after 7 months or whatever of being on the streets every day doing this, I felt like I wasted my time. I was like, why couldn't I have just had this realization at the beginning? And then not stressed about it. And so I had a combination of grief, like I just wasted all that effort, and a combination of anger, like what a waste of time. But then my captain said something very wise to me, and he said that that wasn't a waste of time. That foundation that you made of working hard every day, brought you to the point where you could have this experience, not fake, not as a concept, like someone taught you this, but it really touched your heart, like you really understood. I really understood that, going through the motions isn't enough. Having my own expectations of how things are going to benefit me wasn't enough. It needed to come from a place of truly wanting to do something for God and not have any expectations for myself. That was the only way I was going to be truly happy, regardless of whether I made $10 or $10,000. So that was a beautiful memory for me. I've never forgotten it. It left a lasting imprint on my life. And you could say focus on that experience, that transformative moment. But no, it was actually all the moments, all the days, all the work that came before that led to that moment happening. And I just, sometimes you go day to day and you're just trying to get through the day, right? Sometimes you're just trying to live life. And sometimes, you're looking forward to that next big thing that's going to happen in your life. That new job, that new promotion, that, breakthrough experience of some kind. But we often will neglect the day-to-day habits and efforts that make those moments worthwhile, that make those moments special. I think that if we make a habit of listening to our conscience, making those day-to-day efforts, they may seem small, but I believe that they add up if we can do them consistently. If we make a habit of listening to our conscience, if we make a habit of having faith in God, making small leaps of faith, whatever happens to come into our circumstances at that time, loving somebody who maybe resents me, showing those small efforts, those small acts of grace. Then when big challenges come into our life, or big opportunities that take a lot of faith, or that take a lot of gumption, I think that's a word, then we're poised to be able to do it. But we can't just sit around waiting for those things to happen. So that's my message today. Please consider how in our everyday life, I get it. We feel like our lives don't matter. You may, if I were to ask you today, does your life matter? Probably most of you will just say yes. So you take that answer, you crinkle it up, and you throw it in the trash, okay? Ask ourselves, do we really believe that my life matters to God? And if we do, or if we can find a way to internalize that attitude, then even those small things matter. Those small things can make a difference, especially over the course of your entire life. It will make a difference to somebody. Please join me in prayer. Good morning. Dearest Heavenly Parent, we're so grateful to be here this morning with all brothers and sisters and everyone who couldn't be here today. Heavenly Parent, we know that, life is short, and you see each and every one of our lives. You see the journey that each one of us is on. We just pray for your presence in our lives every moment, even during those times where we are, running away from you, even in those times where we don't see our own value, we don't see the value of our day-to-day efforts and our experiences. Heavenly Parent, we know that you have never given up on us. You have still plans for our lives. And we may not know what those plans are. But I pray, Heavenly Parent, that no matter how big or small things may seem, that we can put our whole hearts into everything that we are doing. There are so many challenges that we face. Every day, every person here has a cross that they are carrying. And everyone's cross, everyone's burden looks different. But I know that you are so proud when you see your children trying to bear that cross, trying to chip away at it every day, Heavenly Parent, trying to do better. We know that your heart is you just want to come and you want to help us. But we know that we can't expect you to lift our burdens for us, Heavenly Parent. But as your children, we want to be able to heal the scars in our lives, the scars in our families. We want to offer you the efforts that we are making every day to love people, to love ourselves, to become better people, to bring some, return some of the love that you have invested into us our whole lives back to you, to return the beauty back to you, Heavenly Parent. We're so grateful for being here this morning and for these everybody here in this room, this church family that we have, where we can really practice loving one another and forgiving one another many times. We pray for your continued presence in our community, in our lives, in our families, and I offer this prayer in our names as Blessed Central Families. Amen and adieu. Thank you.